A Tory MP has lost the party whip and is under investigation over claims he used thousands of pounds worth of campaign funds to pay off, and I quote, bad people who had him locked up in a flat. An investigation by The Times found that Mark Menzies rang an elderly local party volunteer at 3:15 a.m. back in December, saying he needed £5,000 as a matter of life and death. The sum, which then rose to £6,500, was paid by his office manager from her personal bank account and subsequently paid back to her using campaign funds raised from donors. He's also alleged to have used £14,000 given by party donors to pay for private medical expenses. Mr Menzies denies all the allegations. It's understood that the Conservative Party has been aware of the allegations for more than 3 months, but no action's been taken until now. Sir Keir Starmer says the party has questions to answer.
There are obviously a lot of unanswered questions in relation to these allegations, not least why it seems the Conservative Party took so long to act and whether they've reported this to the police, who it seems to me should be involved in this. But I'll be honest, there's a degree of frustration as well. We're 2 weeks away from really important local and mayoral elections when, there's a lot of positive arguments that we want to make about the change we can bring about in these elections. And yet again, we're talking about misbehaviour by Tory MPs. And if ever you needed evidence of why we need to turn the page on this shower and have a fresh start with Labour, I think it's in these allegations that are coming out today.
Well, people might say that's a little rich considering the number of column mentions Angela Rayner and her conduct have occupied, or at least her alleged conduct, because of course she denies any wrongdoing whatsoever. Joining me in the studio now, talkTV's political correspondent Alicia Fitzgerald and political commentator Mike Buckley. And down the line is Henry Hill, the acting editor of Conservative Home. Hi, Henry, and hello to all of you, and thank you very much indeed for joining me. Now, I'm going to let Alicia go through the rigmarole of explaining what it is that it is alleged that this gentleman has been up to, because it really is a kind of confusing litany of bewildering behaviour.
There's a few very strange things about this story. The first of which is that he's been accused of using Conservative Party funds, full stop. And the second thing is the circumstances. Obviously, the claim here is that he was locked up in a flat by, quote, bad people, and he needed this emergency fund of £5,000 to get himself out of this situation. And whether that's true or not, either way, it is a slightly odd circumstance. Either he made that up and that wasn't the real reason that he needed the money, which is odd in many ways, clearly, or that did happen. And then you have to ask, why on earth was he in a situation where he was locked in a flat by bad people, and why has nothing else actually come to light about that? So two very odd scenarios there, and both of which one of them has to be true.
Yeah, so let's bring Mike into this. I mean, bad people. Is that the sort of phrase that an adult uses to another adult? Bad people sounds like a description of a 3-year-old in a temper, doesn't it?
I think it's a phrase that a grown-up uses when they don't want to reveal what's really going on. And clearly he was ringing this, his former campaign manager, 78 years old, I think soon to turn 79, and didn't want to go into the detail, but was desperate to get hold of this money. I mean, something very odd, assuming these allegations are correct, has clearly happened. And it's right that the Conservative Party have removed the whip now. I think we're all now wondering why they didn't do it 3 months ago when they first heard of these allegations. I'm also wondering whether Mr Menzies or whether the Conservative Party have been to the police, because it sounds like the bad people were clearly doing something illegal. But I think there's also a huge question mark over how on earth this MP got himself into this situation. I mean, the broader question, though, I mean, there's a question here about the Conservative Party, why did they not act sooner? But the broader question is, why does this keep happening with Conservative MPs? It's only a couple of weeks since William Bragg removed the whip from himself because he'd behaved in such an untoward manner. This is not good. Our country needs better and deserves better.
Let's bring Henry Hill into this. Henry, it's not as if Mr Menzies wouldn't have realised how this would play out if indeed it happened. He denies anything untoward did occur, but he must have realised when he made the phone call, if he made the phone call, that it wasn't going to look good and it was going to unfold in an unedifying manner and probably end up in his having the whip removed. So you wonder why his judgment wouldn't have told him not to do it.
Well, I mean, assuming that something genuinely happened, and of course we don't know. According to the Times reports, basically he went out with somebody and then they went to someone else's flat and then something happened and they were trying to get money out of him allegedly for cleaning expenses or something like that. Yeah, in the moment, if he was drunk and vulnerable, he might have panicked, right? But I think the question for me is, like, when he got out of that situation, why did he not realize, right, the best thing I can do now is come clean, tell the party, if I was being blackmailed, that is a crime, go to the police and try and get ahead of this and close it down. Because instead what's happened is that he has effectively, bounced an elderly party member into fronting him quite a lot of money. And then instead of even paying that back himself, he has taken it, allegedly, from funds donated by Conservative donors and members to fight for his re-election. So it's the doubling down afterwards that I think is really baffling. Somebody making a stupid decision when they're drunk and in a vulnerable situation, that you don't condone it, but you can at least understand how that can happen. It's coming out of it and thinking, I'm going to keep digging and try and cover this up. That's the really baffling decision.
What's the bit where you think, I'm a Tory MP, I'm an MP, I'm a member of Parliament, I'm in receipt of public money, I'm somebody that is meant to be some kind of role model and some kind of fine, upstanding citizen. That's the ticket I got elected on. That's why I owe it to people to behave in a way that most people will consider to be decent and responsible and, above board and punctilious. And so I won't go to a flat with bad people, no matter how much I might want to. And I won't get so roaring drunk that my judgment and powers of it desert me. And so that Henry Hill doesn't have to come on the television and say, well, we all understand how if you're roaring drunk, you might make poor decisions. But do we understand how, if you're a member of Parliament, you would allow yourself to get so roaring drunk that your decision-making would be impaired and you end up possibly in a house with bad people having to be rescued and having to commandeer a huge amount of money from a 78-year-old former employee or whatever the hell it is? I mean, none of it's okay, is it, for members of Parliament or really anybody else?
No, absolutely. I just want to be very clear. I wasn't condoning the initial behaviour. I was simply saying, trying to understand how the story unfolded. You're absolutely right. And members of Parliament, and indeed, I think most adults, should be much more careful about how they conduct themselves. But especially members of Parliament, they are our representatives. They are in the public eye, and as we've seen from the Will Ragg story and others, they are targets. Right? There are people, malicious actors, who will try and entrap them, put them in compromising situations. Now, that's obviously the fault of the criminals, but MPs have to grow up. They have to grow up and realise that they can't party like students without taking unacceptable risks. And it's interesting because I don't know why this happened in this particular case, but it was actually one of the things that it was warned about decades ago by Chris Mullin when Parliament first slashed its sitting hours and no longer sat all night. And he sort of rather sagely warned that if MPs weren't in the House of Commons debating legislation, they'd all be in London and they'd just be stuck doing something else. But it's clear, I think, that for whatever reason, there is an unfortunate tendency for some MPs to come to Westminster and then effectively just end up living a little bit like students. They party very hard. They end up in strangers' flats and all the rest of it. Now, that's fine when you're in your early 20s or you're at university and when you don't have a high-profile public position. But it should be obvious to everyone who's gone to the trouble of getting elected to Parliament that that is not a way that you can conduct yourself when you are in that position. And if you do, you should at the very least have the decency to pay your way out of the mess, right? If you need to front up £5,000 or whatever, you pay it yourself. You don't raid the piggy bank that's been put together by party activists. Why the hell would you ever need to pay someone,
a bad person, £5,000? In whose repertoire of behaviour is that a facet? You get involved with bad people, you're in a flat with them, and in order to get out, you have to give them £5,000. Why would you ever have to do that?
If his story was true, he was clearly being blackmailed, right? He'd been incredibly stupid. He'd ended up in a stranger's flat in a compromising position, and they were blackmailing him. That's what's happened. He should never have allowed himself to be put in that position. It's a disgraceful way for an elected representative to behave. But I'm just saying, I'm not excusing that at all.
What do we think the compromising position was? What was he meant to be doing?
I'm not going to look.
We don't know.
I have
no
idea. The press doesn't say. No, we don't know.
The press doesn't say. We don't know. He was doing something, or rather, we think, in the stranger's flat allegedly, that allowed him to be blackmailed.
Well, there has to have been something that made them feel, if his story is true, there has to have presumably been something which made them feel they were in a position to extort money out of him and made him feel that he had to pay it. But we don't know what that is.
Henry, thank you. Alicia, let me ask you this. You might think that the behaviour of Ragg and Menzies might lead one to conclude that there are cover-ups going on in Westminster, because both men seem to think that they could somehow or other get away with it and somehow or other, draw a veil over it, and somehow or other it would all go away or be made to go away, or even if it hadn't gone away, nobody would ever find out about it. So I would like to ask you whether you think there is an atmosphere or a climate of cover-ups, of things being hidden, of concealing. And so both Rag and Menzies aren't idiotic, and they were probably maybe sensible to think it might never see the light of day, whatever it is they've got up to.
I mean, it's definitely present in Westminster, of course, both for political reasons and for personal reasons. Lots of MPs have really close friendships, and also we have to remember that if you are an MP that maybe you yourself has been in a situation that you don't want exposing, you're not probably going to then go and dob in your friend over something over this. That's just the way it works. And then we've also got the political reasons. These parties are meant to be united. They're not meant to be going behind each other's backs. I know it's hard to believe at the moment because it happens a lot. But in theory, that isn't the role of being in a party. You're meant to be a big cohesive group and you're meant to work together. So I think definitely when they think that there's a chance that things can be buried, that will always usually be the first port of call.
And Mike, when we hear about the activities of the whip and a three-line whip and people being whipped into, voting in a certain way or showing up for a certain vote, one of the things that we are led to believe is that one of the weapons available to whips is this kind of inside knowledge of who's done what, the catalogue of sins, the litany of faux pas, whatever it is that has blotted your copybook but nobody yet knows about. They do know about it. That's why they can exert pressure. So they do it with carrots, which are, if you do this, you might get a really excellent job in a ministerial job, or you might get a gong, or we might kick you up to the House of Lords. And they do it also with sticks, which are, well, we know who you did what with and in what position and where it was and what the accoutrements were and who these bad people were and what it was that they were trying to get 5,000 quid out of you for having done, allegedly. But we won't tell if you vote in a certain way or show up for the vote.
That is all true, but obviously there need to be limits on that. I mean, it may be that the whips know that somebody got a bit drunk or, did something a bit silly, but there's a difference between doing something a bit silly, being blackmailed, extorting and misusing funds that are not yours, phoning up a 70-year-old, 18-year-old, and getting yourself in that position in the first place.
Yes.
There's clearly the potential for some illegality here. I mean, there's no intimation that the Conservative whips knew about this and have been covering it up for 3 months. But somebody in the party has known about this and been covering it up for 3 months, which means that potentially those individuals or the party as a whole are complicit in this not being made.
Yes,
Alicia,
so what is
this
not, knowing about something, knowing that it would be incredibly embarrassing, knowing that whoever it is, the allegation itself is kind of an indictment and isn't at all a good look, especially in an election year, and somehow or other letting it lie and not doing anything about it.
Well, I mean, even Grant Shapps, who's obviously pretty senior in the Conservative Party, even said that he was definitely aware that there have been, various issues with this MP and for a while, but obviously this kind of last story that came out was a bit of a straw breaking camel's back, and that's why it's all suddenly come to light now. But that does obviously raise questions about what is going on and why people think it is okay to try and bury these quite big stories under the carpet and just hope that they don't come out. There is definitely a bit of a culture of that at the moment. But realistically, I mean, we can all sit here and say, oh, surely you've learnt because this story came out, or, it always comes out in the end. But sadly, that just doesn't seem to have an impact, and people always would definitely try and rather bury stuff than be honest, I suppose.
Of course, if they succeed, then that is a message that's loud and clear. Things don't always come out in the end. And actually, the disinfectant of sunlight and minute inspection doesn't always apply. And therefore, you might as well have a good old bash at hiding it, because you might succeed in hiding it.